Cool. Well, this is
Good evening, everyone. My name is Noah Gould, and I oversee alumni and student programs here at the Acton Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here for this evening event. We're so pleased you're here. We have many different educational institutions represented here in the room, and so I think this is a really wonderful time and place to have this conversation. When we think about a flourishing society, certainly virtue and education are a topic that we can't ignore. So it's certainly I'm so happy that we're having this conversation tonight. Before I introduce our speaker, a few housekeeping things. We'll have a 30-minute lecture followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. We are live streaming this lecture, so once we get to the Q&A portion, please wait for the mic to be passed to you so we can catch your question for the live stream. So without further ado, I would like to invite to welcome David Michael Phelps, who is the president of Harmel Academy of the Trades. He joined Harmel after a 20-year career in education and media production. He also served as president of the board during the refounding of Sacred Heart Academy in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and as the director of development and artist in residence during the refounding of Compass Film Academy. He earned his master's degree in English language and literature from Central Michigan University and studied English and Latin at Hope College. David currently serves on the board of Sacred Heart Academy and the board of directors for the Grand Rapids Griffins Youth Foundation, where he has coached youth hockey for 15 years. Until his appointment at Harmel, he also served on the founding advisory board. David and his wife Sherry have 4 children and are parishioners at Sacred Heart of Jesus in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So please join me in welcoming David Michael Phelps.
Well, thank you everyone. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to the Acton Institute for having me. I did the calculation when I got here this afternoon. It's been 20 years since I was an employee of the Acton Institute, and it's definitely grown and changed. And so I'm happy to be here with friends. And so thanks everyone for having me. I suppose I'll start with a couple of words about how I came to be where I am today. I have a 2015 Toyota Tacoma, so that's how I got here. So thanks for being here with me and sharing your evening with me. I'm afraid, I apologize in advance. This is going to be a bit of a mess, okay? So let me explain what I mean when I say it's going to be a bit of a mess. The topic we're going to cover tonight, which has something to do with the meaning of work and skilled trades and the formation of character, that's a very complicated topic. It's going to require a lot more time than we have. So we're only going to be able to cover part of it. And the trouble there is that sometimes when you can only cover the part of something, you end up coming away with a wrong idea of the whole. So that's one reason it's going to be sort of rough. The other reason this is going to be rough is because the story that we're going to tell here involves some degree of mystery in sort of the theological sense, right? Okay, and sometimes if you have unclear ideas or problems, or you can't get a full idea of something, it ends up being sort of like an intellectual problem masquerading as mystery, right? And sometimes charlatans will come along and they'll say unclear things, and they'll pretend that it's very profound. And I really hope that I'm not a charlatan, but there's a risk that's going to happen tonight, okay? And the third reason this is going to be a bit of a mess is because we're going to be saying some things about the skilled trades, and those are messy. And I mean those are messy not just sort of in a physical sense, but the skilled trades, by their nature, as we'll see later tonight, they involve a type of language that is more multifaceted than the language we're going to be using here tonight. So I'm going to say some words out of my mouth hole, and you're going to go in your ear hole, and we're going to talk with verbal language. But skilled trades is a language too, but it's much more multifaceted, multidimensional. And so what we say here tonight is going to be a little bit like trying to describe a sphere by drawing a circle. Like, we'll get the idea of it, right? But there's so much more to what we're going to say than we can just say in sort of a lecture. So that's another bit of a mess. The reality is that the skilled trades is a language, as I say, but the words that are being used in that language are, you can think of them as incarnate words that are written with the body and with our actions, and not simply not simply abstract words. So you are, I'm sorry, you're doomed to listen to a doofus tonight try to account for this incarnate language and sort of disincarnate words. And so I'm sorry for what's about to happen. If you're Catholic, then you get a little extra time off purgatory for tonight. And if you're not Catholic, well, we still get time off purgatory. We're just not going to talk about it, okay? All right, so, all right. So there's this larger story we're going to tell. I want to tell the sort of the larger story that we're not going to have the time to talk about. And then I'll do that briefly. And then I'm going to tell you what part of the story we're going to talk about. So we're here to talk about like the meaning of, what's the title, something, the meaning of work or something, trades, character stuff. Okay. So I'm going to tell you the larger story, and then we're going to zero in on the core bit that has to do with this question of character. Okay. So here's part one. Okay. Whatever we mean by the meaning of work, and whatever we mean about work's power to form character, are interdependent meanings. Here's what that means, is that work to shape us depends on what it is we mean by that word work. And there are some very obvious, clear, and right meanings to the word work, but then there are some not so obvious meanings. Now, I think that to understand how that goes back and forth between work and character and work interplay, I actually think the skilled trades is a really great lens to sort of examine that question. There's some things that come about when you look through the lens of skilled trades that can reveal some things about work and character that aren't as easy to see in other types of work. So we're going to try to explore that. And that's the bit we're going to spend the most time on, okay? But here's the kicker. There is another part of the story that if all we do is come to an understanding about what work is and how it forms character and how the formation of character understands what work is, right? If that's all we do, then it's going to fall apart. Because whatever the relationship is between work and character, it depends on a more fundamental and, in a sense, a larger story that we're not going to talk about here tonight, but it's very important to our work at Harmel Academy of the Trades, is the gospel has something to say about these things, okay? And what the gospel has to say about work is, at the end of the day, the thing that not only makes sense of the whole thing, but holds the key, in my opinion, to really helping the coming generation understand, live into, and be inspired by what work actually is, okay? Now, that larger story about how the gospel of work sort of like ties everything up in a bow and fulfills it, I'm not going to have time to go into that tonight because we've only got 25 minutes, okay? And it's a good hour long to do that one. But if you have questions, you want to talk afterwards, I'd be happy to talk about that. Okay, so everyone good with that? Everyone good with the mess? Okay, look out for the charlatan. Here we go. All right. Now, the question of the meaning of work. This is a question that you hear taken up a lot, and there are lots of sort of answers or ways of describing why work is meaningful, and there's some really great answers. And but I'm going to be honest with you. I find all the answers, almost all the answers I've come across, even ones that come with from really good and well-meaning and sort of intelligent Christians, for example, I find them lacking a little bit. It feels like they're missing something, and that's fine. I mean, they're mostly right. They're almost, in my opinion, almost all right. But like G.K. Chesterton said, nothing is so wrong as that which is almost right. And so I think it's really important to not be happy with good answers. We should be looking for the best answer. Okay. Now, I'm not going to say I have that, but I know a guy, and he's got some really great things to say. Now, if we don't get this story right about the meaning of work, okay, if we don't really get the best answer about what work is and why it's meaningful, then there's a whole host of other questions that not only are we going to be ill-prepared to meet, but there actually is a chance that we do damage, right? It's sort of like having a drug as a medicine that's almost the right one, right? I mean, maybe we can take care of some symptoms, right? But maybe the underlying issue will remain unaddressed. Okay, so when I talk about the meaning of work, I'm not talking about the definition of work, although that's, I suppose, important as well. I mean something like the question, the answer to the question, well, what does work even matter? Why does it even matter? And you may say, well, duh, like, if you don't work, you don't eat, and, got to eat, and got to pay for my kids' braces. There's all sorts of good, practical, obvious things about why work is meaningful. Yeah, but why? Why does it have to be that way? Why work, right? And, certain people of certain political persuasions are like, boy, we just love to have it all without the work, right? Why do we have to have it at all? Why can't we just, have things provided and whatever? And we can all, I think, rightly say, like, oh, it's silly because, you got to eat, okay? But even in that question, right, we have to take that question seriously. We can't simply be happy with the pragmatic or the immediate or obvious answers. And one of the reasons we can't be happy with that is because the coming generation of workers are not happy with it. Young men in particular, at Harmel Academy of the Trades, it's a men's school, right? So I'm going to say men and dudes a lot, okay? I'm not trying to be exclusionary. It's just my world, okay? But this is actually something that's of concern with young men in particular, right? Young men aren't going to work. It's not that they don't have opportunity to work. They have tons of it. It's not that there aren't educational programs for them to be trained in work. There's tons of it. It's not like there aren't, especially here in Michigan, like vast amounts of state-funded dollars in order to say, well, if we just throw enough money at it, then it's going to work. No, they're not going to work because they're asking questions like, well, what does it matter? Does anything matter? Okay? And if we're not willing to take their question seriously on some level, if our response is going to be just like, hey, you just got to learn how to muscle it out, right? Because how are you going to pay for your car? How are you going to pay for kids' braces? How are you going to pay for food? If we don't take the question seriously, they're still not going to show up for work. They're just not going to. The reality is that there's a much deeper crisis than what we see is the crisis of the skilled trades, right? You probably know some of the statistics. If not, Google it or grok it. You'll find all you want. One of the simplest ones is one that Mike Rowe talks about a lot, that for every 5 tradesmen, skilled tradesmen in this country that are retiring, they're being replaced by 2, okay? It's a huge problem in every sector, like huge. It's an existential problem. It's a civic problem. It's a political problem, right? And a lot of times what they'll say is like, well, part of the problem is the guys don't have enough character. And there is a character crisis with young workers. There absolutely is. Young men that don't know that, you got to show up on time. Or, that you got to go every day. Or you got to do what you said you were going to do. Like basic questions like this. Basic questions. Like I talk to shop owners and foremen and plant managers all the time. Like I'm talking basic things. Not interested, okay? But that's not the problem either. The problem is this more fundamental question is not just why does work matter? Why does anything matter? And if we don't get real about saying like the sort of answers that we got to start exploring and coming up with have to speak to that deeper level of the human soul, I don't care what your program is. I don't care what your incentive package is. They're still not going to show up. This is a deeply existential spiritual crisis that we're facing. And until we understand that that's actually what we're talking about, we can talk all we want about new types of programming and trade schools or whatever it is. I'm just telling you, it's not going to work. So, what do we do? That's a problem. Now, this spiritual problem, as I alluded to earlier, I think, obviously you have to speak spiritually about some things. Ask me later, okay? But there's an entry point to the question about this question of meaning, specifically meaning in work, that I think that the skilled trades can start to open up for us a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about what work is, okay? I want to take the lead for that question from a fella named St. John Paul II. Okay? So St. John Paul II, he is a saint, I suppose. Okay? And he was Pope, and he was a working guy early in his life, and he wrote something called Laborem Exertions about human work. That is, I think, one of the most important things that he wrote, frankly. I'll say why that is here in a second. But he points out that when we talk about work, we're talking about something that has two aspects to it. Two. That is constituted of two things. And of those two things, one of them we're very used to talking about, and we understand it very clearly. And one of those we almost never talk about, but is actually the more important thing. Okay, so the first one, okay, is the thing that we're all familiar with. When we use the word work, he calls it objective work. Okay, these are the things we do, the things we make, the things we sell, right? It's you go to work. You're a plumber, and so you go fix a shower, or you are in manufacturing, so you make whatever widget it is, or whatever, or you're an accountant, and you balance the books, right? This is what we think of as work. It's some sort of productive activity. It's some sort of ordering activity. It's some sort of service, right? And you might say, well, yeah, duh, that's work. But John Paul says that's the objective aspect of work. He says, but there's another aspect. The other aspect is what he calls the subjective aspect of work. And he says, between those two, they're both important, right? They're part of a unified, integrated whole. You can't really separate one from the other. But he says, of the two aspects, the subjective is more important because it's more primary. So what is subjective work? Subjective work is the fact that what is being done in work is an action taken by a human person. Work is an act of the human person. Right? And you might say, like, wow, yeah, I guess it would take a philosopher to come up with something that obvious, right? Okay? But it's really important what he means. So we're going to hang out on it for a second. One of the things that he means is that work is clearly valued for its service and production, but it is to be primarily valued and even primarily understood as something done by a human person who has dignity by fact of being a human person. What he says is that this action, because it's an act of a human person, like all actions of a human person, sorry, I'm going to get super philosophical for a second, I'll unpack it here in a second. Like all acts of a human person, it is a participation in the self-realization of that person's personhood. Whew, okay, that sounds like philosopher talk. Here's what it means. Let me say it again, okay? Work is a participation in you becoming who you are. It is a collaboration, ultimately with God, of you becoming what you were made to be. So let me try to make it a little less sort of philosophical. Here's how I explain it to the boys at Harmel Academy. So, okay, I'm going to ask you what seems like a very simple question. The simple question is this. It says, when a man builds a wall, what is he building? And they say, well, a wall. And I say, you're wrong. Well, of course he's building a wall. But what he's building is a man who builds walls. That's what John Paul means by subjective work. The thing that's being built is a man who is more skilled, right? A man who has created more. And because he has created more, he has become more. Now, I don't want to hang out on that point too long, but it's important that we understand that the formation of our personhood through our work, according to John Paul, that's what we're doing when we work. This isn't to put this at odds with objective work, the services we render, the products we make, all of those super important things. All John Paul is saying is that that subjective nature of work is the part that holds the key, and he calls it the key to the social question. Here's what he means. He says, if you want to understand social problems, if you want to have something to do about those social problems, he says work is the key to understanding that. And the aspect of work that you have to understand is that when we work, we aren't simply in some removed way providing service to others, as important as that is. That's not merely what we're doing. We are also participating in becoming what we were made to be. Now, the skilled trades actually can show us a little something about how it is that our work can help us understand that we're becoming more as persons. Now, all work can do this, but in a way you can kind of see it a little more clearly and like the work of a skilled tradesman. Okay, so just real quick, by skilled trades, just quick definition, okay? It's a dirty one. But by what I mean by that is that it's a sort of work that requires proximity. I have to be close to it, right? I can't unclog a toilet over Zoom, okay? It's really hard. Don't ask me how I know, okay? So I have to be physically proximate, present. And I have to be present with my body. Now, all work technically involves your body, right? So accountants use their bodies too. But the difference with skilled trades is that it's my body that I'm using as a point of agency to bring reality in the world. Bringing order to the reality of the world, right? So something is changing in the physical world, and it's my body that I'm using to put it into order, okay? So what is it the skilled trades can teach us about how our character is formed and how we become more? The first thing is that the skilled trades, this sort of work, requires what I'll call an attention of vulnerability, okay? If you're a welder or a machinist or you're working on a lathe or something, you better be paying attention. Because if you're not paying attention, you could hurt yourself, you could kill yourself, you could hurt or kill someone else, right? There's literal skin in the game with this sort of work. And you better be an attentive person. This type of attention makes you aware that you have limits. Like, your body bumps up against reality, and guess what? Reality punches back. And that type of habit of being in that space where I continually have to pay attention to reality and my own limits with regard to reality, and I have to respect reality and the laws of reality. I don't get to make them up. I don't get to decide that gravity doesn't count today just because I dropped the anvil on my foot. Right? What this does is it creates inside of that worker a habit, a disposition to the world of attentiveness and respectfulness and frankly, humility. It's very hard to be a narcissist when you're stupid enough to put a chisel in the meat of your hand. Again, don't ask me how I know that. Now, I said it's very hard to be a narcissist. I didn't say it's impossible. Okay, so, all right. So this attention of vulnerability that we have as tradespeople, right, is something that gives us what I call sensible intelligence. Tradesmen tend to be very commonsensical people, just generally, not all of them, but mostly, right? And I think it's because they're sensible in the full sense of that term. Is that at Harmel, we define intelligence, that word intelligence, we define it as the ability to read reality. And the way that tradesmen read reality is with their bodies. Not with their minds too, but also with their bodies, with their senses. And like we were just saying, that when you are continually running up against how reality works, and say, for example, the laws of physics, right? Then you become accustomed to reading the world in a way that is very sensible in the common sense. Now, because a tradesman is accustomed to being vulnerable to the world, attending to the world in a vulnerable place, I can be wounded, right? I'm not the end-all, be-all. And because they have this sort of sensible reason about themselves, what they tend to do, whether or not they know this is happening, is they tend to engage with reality in a type of cooperative way. This is how they tend to engage reality. In a cooperative way. I push on reality a little bit, it pushes back at me, right? And in other words, reality is not something to necessarily oppose, although sometimes, sometimes you really gotta fight to get the bolt out or something, right? But the way that I engage with reality is something more like a dance. It has its requirements, I have my desires, we move together. And as a result, this making or this fixing or this serving that I'm doing in the physical world, there's a type, not only a type of rightness that you can experience about it, there's something right with reality, because it obeys certain laws, it's predictable, right? It's natural. But there's also a sense in which when I do work with this reality and it starts to respond to me, I start to recognize myself in my work. You probably know the sort of thing if you've done any sort of this work, or if you know people that do this sort of work, which is to say, you can recognize a man by the quality of his work. There's something of the work, there's something of the man in the work. You can sort of see the mark of the craftsman in the craft. And what happens is that these, this reciprocal relationship that comes with reality makes it all feel a little personal. If you can probably imagine the sort of thing I'm saying if you haven't experienced it yourself, but a craftsman, someone who's really, really good, right, will sometimes get a little grumpy if other people don't respect the level of work and craft that's there. In other words, you might say they kind of take it personally. And in fact, if they themselves don't live up to their own standards, they kind of take it personally, right? So what this does is this vulnerable attention of this sensible intelligence leads to a type of personal reason. Like it's personal to me. My work is personal to me, right? It's not just this thing that I do over there that's separate from me. It somehow involves my person. The world is affected by my person, and my person is affected by the world. There's a relationship that's been created between me and reality. Now, when I have a personal relationship with reality, right, then I start to understand that whatever is happening in the world and in creation and in this stuff that's being fixed or served or built, this is something that, how should you say, calls to me. It invites me. If I have a personal, if my work is something deeply personal, and it's relational with reality, and obviously other people too, then I have this opportunity, this calling, this invitation to respond to reality. Like I have the ability to respond. Let's call this ability to respond a sense of responsibility. Like I'm responsible for the world. And I'm responsible to the world. And I'm responsible for my work. And I'm responsible to my work. And everything that it means. In other words, I have not just the literal skin of the game, like I can hurt myself as a welder, but I have skin in the game in a very personhood about my work and those I serve and the product that I'm making and the world that I'm building. Now, as you can start to see, that this, how should we say, experience of I'm vulnerable to the world and that makes me more sensible to the world, and that means it's personal to me and I have a sense of responsibility now, right? This isn't exclusive just to the skilled trades. This is all work. Our work makes us who we are. Now, you'll notice I've said very little, if anything at all, about specific types of objective work, right? About whether or not you're, building a widget or whether or not you're balancing the books as an accountant, whatever it is, right? Everything that I've said is true of every sort of work. But everything that I've said, as I promised earlier, is incomplete. Because if I am simply playing out this drama with the world, I form it and it forms me, it is possible, because let's face it, we're all kind of lousy, right? I mean, if you know anything about that story with the garden and the snake and the apple and all that sort of stuff, right? We're all pretty broken, right? And, it's like one of my favorite writers once said, you don't want a bunch of yahoos deconstructing a house, right? They'll do a lot of damage, okay? And in the same way, we're just kind of a bunch of yahoos at work, and if it was just us engaging the world, we're going to make a dog's breakfast out of it, okay? And so what that means is that there has to be a way of orienting this meaning, this personal interaction that I have with the world, in something that's even deeper than just me and the world or me and my relationships. And as I said, I can't get into that right now. But what I can say is that part of the story, that grounds our work and the way that it forms us, informs our character. By the way, the word character means stamp. The way that work stamps us, will only be fully true, and the story will only be completed if that stamp, if that character is not simply the world and our work stamping itself on us as we stamp ourselves on the world, but if that stamp, that mark, is somehow united to someone else who is working more fundamentally. There's another person involved in work. In fact, this other person involved in work is the one that's actually doing the work in and through us. And it's only when we come to understand that our work and our stamping on the world and its stamping on us is a subset of this larger story of this other worker, then only then will we be able to locate the sense of meaning in our work that transcends our immediate needs, as important as they are, and the needs of our loved ones, which are super important, and even the way that our work forms us in our character and ultimately in our soul. There's this other worker at work. And for what it's worth, he too, for 30 years in Nazareth, was a working guy. So that's part one. Part two, no, I'm kidding. Okay, so I'm done. Okay, so I think we're going to do questions or something, right? So I'd be happy to take questions or for you to shout at me.
Go ahead and raise your hand and we'll walk around and bring the mic to you.
Thank you.
No questions. Good. Okay. Question. Yes, sir.
So you hit on the idea of personhood and dignity and the Catholic social values. I noticed I ran a township in Muskegon County, and we had a heck of a time filling the positions for mechanical inspector, plumbing inspector, those types of things.
Yeah.
And that's this dirge in the entire industry of the trades. But also it seems that the state is making it harder to get certified to become those inspectors.
How
so
about
it
that?
seems like the idea of subsidiarity applies as well. I noticed you didn't hit on that Catholic social teaching,
Yeah.
and it obviously applies in your field. I would, for a mess of a presentation, this was a beautiful presentation, and I would like to know your thoughts on that.
So are we talking about, do you want me here at the Acton Institute to opine on what happens when the state gets involved with these things? I'd be happy to, but I can also point you to everything else. Okay. Yeah, actionable. Yeah, okay, so a couple things. First of all, yeah, there's so much to this question of work and Catholic social. I mean, there's so many rooms in this mansion, right? So you mentioned subsidiarity as an important one. But practically, what does this mean for us? Well, okay, I got good news and I got bad news. Okay, what do you want first? Bad news it is. Okay. So the bad news is that we didn't get into this mess overnight. And we're not getting out of it overnight. And there are probably rougher days to come. I think that's just buckle up, okay? We're not just going to be able to flip a switch and all of a sudden everyone is going to be skilled and we're going to have everything we need and the state's going to say like, oh, it's great, I guess we're going to cut our budget. All right? That was a joke, the state cutting the budget. Okay, so so there's bad news, okay? But here's the good news, right? The good news is that we each have a type of responsibility, right? So to the extent that we say, well, what's the problem? What's the solution to this big crisis across the country or this big crisis across the state or this big crisis across Muskegon County, right? That's really not the answer that the question we should all be asking ourselves. The question is, where I am, when I am I working with the one who's working? Because one of the things we tell our guy, and again, now I'm getting to the preachy part, right? The religious part. But this is the best I got for you, man, which is this. Like, we're not the ones that are going to fix the mess, right? Divine Providence is doing his thing. And the question we got to ask ourselves is whether or not we got our eyes on the prize. And the prize is not the big political solution. The prize is, am I doing what the good Lord has asked me to do right now? And in a sense, that is, I think that, in a sense, maybe the truest form of subsidiarity, right? Is what's the Lord doing right now, and what are you called to do right now? Not with the big problem, but what can you do? Boy, is that a cop-out answer? God's always giving us those cop-out answers, right? Okay.
It's a good cliche.
Yeah, good. That's right. Dr. Pastana.
Hi, David, Michael. Thank you. Two questions. The way you've set it up, it seems as though the skilled worker is on his or her own, repairing the or constructing the whatever. But don't most skilled workers work with other skilled workers? And how does that play into all these issues of responsibility and
Yeah.
imprint? And then maybe the second part of that is the way things are working now. It's not many skilled workers are self-employed and have their own company.
Yeah.
They're working for
Yeah.
some business, and the business is imposing constraints on what they do. How does that
Yeah, that's
play
good.
into all this?
So to answer the first question, the way I begin to answer, I'm not going to give a full one, but I think there's a path. Is in the same way, not only are some interesting things that there are some interesting things that being learned about, like who we actually are as human persons, that are kind of easier to see for skilled trades. I think there are also some things that are easy to see about how we work in common that again aren't unique to the skilled trades, but in some ways they're easier to see. Okay, so one of my favorite examples of this, and I hesitate to bring it up because otherwise I'm going to talk for 3 hours, but is the film Ford versus Ferrari. It's a brilliant reflection on what I call a community of creative collaboration. Another word for a community of creative collaboration is business. Right? That's what a business is. It's a community of creative collaboration. And there are certain things that you can see as guys are trying to build, the GT40, for example, that come to the forefront a little bit more. And so I think there's a whole room of the mansion, so to speak, like we said before, to answer that corporate question. The second part of your question, though, was, remind me? Oh, well, for themselves or companies. Yeah. Is there something the skilled trades can teach about, working for yourself as opposed to a company a little more? Nothing comes to mind right away, to be honest with you. But I'm sure there is something. I would say, maybe it's this. Maybe it's on the question of the responsibility, right? It's harder to pass the buck when you own the shop. At some point, the buck stops with you. And if it's not working right, it's your fault. Or at least you have to act as though it is, right? So I think that whether it be skilled trades or any type of business ownership, there's certainly a virtue that comes with putting skin in the game. And but the thing is about the skilled trades is sometimes the failures are easier to see, right? Because listen, the toilet flushes or it doesn't. They're easier to see, right? In a sense, the scorecard is easier to keep, I think, in certain skilled trades. The motorcycle starts or it doesn't start. And if you've been hired to fix the motorcycle, you don't get to say that it's fixed, and neither does your customer. The motorcycle does, right? And so that there is a certain common standard of performance that maybe makes it a little easier to be less of a creep. I don't know. Although I know some motorcyclists are creeps. But most of them are great. Yes. Here? Or over here. Yes.
Hello. Thank
Sorry.
you for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. One thing that I was sort of wondering is that it seems like more and more young men are foregoing college right now and foregoing any sort of employment. And right now, most of the students there are women. So what would it mean for society if the young men that aren't going to college or aren't doing any of those jobs joined the trades en masse? Like, what do you think that would look like?
What would it mean and what would it look like? Well, yeah, I was talking with someone before. So male college attendance in the U.S. has dropped 10% in the last 10 years, and it's just continuing to go that way. And there's lots of things we could sort of speculate about why that is. But here's one reason why I think that is, and that I think is the beginning of the answer to your question. And again, this is don't think poorly of me. I think this is just generally true of a dude. I'm sure it's true of women too, but I'm a dude, so I'm not going to presume to speak for women. But I think dudes want adventure, right? Dudes want an adventure, and if that's an adventure with brothers, they want it even more. So my hope, I can just say what I've seen at Harmel Academy. I mean, we're entering our 6th year. And I was telling someone before, we've barely, if any, marketed at all. And, the 27 incoming students this year are coming from 17 states. Okay? And so word just spreads, right? And we're in the middle of a move to a big new campus, and we love it. And if you want to donate to the move campaign, you can do that too. Okay. But these dudes come for the community of adventure that's there. So the question is whether or not it is involved with, they can find that adventure at college, or whether or not they find it sort of in the trades. The fact of the matter that they're taking some level of agency and not just saying, well, I guess my guidance counselor said I should go to college, so I guess I'm going to go borrow $100,000 and do that. The fact that they're taking at least some measure of self-activation and agency is probably a good sign, so long as we can direct it in the right place, because God knows male agency without an adventure is a dangerous thing, right? But male agency with adventure can be glorious. So I hope the latter is what we face. Great. Yes, sir. Question here?
So actually following up on that, with higher education becoming less attractive to men overall because of the numbers that we've been seeing. And that's causing a problem for higher education, for institutions, colleges. There was just another one on the east side of the state that's closing down, a Catholic one. And especially for private colleges, four-year colleges that are struggling. How might these higher institutions be able to, what might they be able to learn from the skilled trades? How might they be able to actually utilize them in order to help the higher academy survive this time and then grow and develop?
Yeah, good question. How long you got? So I would say this. I found myself in the last 6 years having this conversation a lot. And one thing I can say is that if a college wants to get in the skilled trades game because they think it's going to be the salvation to their enrollment problem, that's exactly the wrong reason to do it, because it's not. It's going to be round pegs and square holes. So that's the bad news, okay? The badder news is that I've got my own little theories on this that probably I shouldn't say because they'll get me into trouble here, but I would say that I think the higher ed crisis, that's another crisis, I think that tumor is spread more than those colleges realize. I think this has been a problem it was kind of revealed by COVID, but it's been there for a while, and I think it's much deeper. And I don't think that some tweaks to the programming are going to change. I think we're facing a cultural revolution. And how can it be otherwise? Not to get too deeply into it, but as an example, the sort of thing I mean, if you view higher education, it's certainly more than this, but if you were to view higher education as a means of conveying information, it's clearly so much more than that, okay? But let's just say that you were to have that understanding about what higher education was. Well, there's this new thing called the internet, and it's really efficient, right? It's super efficient way. Now, clearly, higher ed is about more than just that. I certainly wouldn't reduce it. But I will say that at least part of the models of education, part of the technologies of education, because frankly, a college is a type of a technology. And the sorts of things that technology were designed to meet are problems we don't have anymore. And so I think there are much larger questions about higher ed generally. But as far as when it comes to what they might learn by looking at the skilled trades, well, one of them is, I think they need to start asking themselves the question is, are we just forming heads? Or are we forming complete human persons, integrated mind, soul, and body? And the body is the one that's the hardest. One of my favorite thinkers on this point, the late, great Sir Ken Robinson, gave a talk 25 years ago where he said that educators think that schools are there to basically educate the head, and if you ever talk to professional educational administrators, their bodies are alien to them. They think their bodies are a way of getting their heads to meetings. They just have a disembodied understanding of the world. And so I would say, if you're a college, and if you're not examining how you're forming a whole integrated person, that's their mind, yes, that's their soul, yes, but it's also their bodies, then you're missing something about what the enterprise of education should be, which is the formation of the human person. It's not a very good answer, but maybe it's a start. Over here and then over
Yeah,
here.
thank you for the talk. My question is, can you give us some information about how you draw in these young men and teach them how to read reality and who succeeds there and just what that history's been?
So when you say, I'm sorry, I want to clarify. So when you say draw them in, do you mean like where do they come from, or like how do you get them engaged?
How do you get them through the process of wanting to be there and then engaging and reading reality?
Yeah. So a quick word on that. Like I said, like we just hired a recruiter last week. I guess that's something we should probably do. But so far, well, I'll tell you what the secret is. Okay, I'm going to tell you the secret. If you're in enrollment in colleges, here's the thing: make friends with homeschooling moms, right? Because man, word spreads. I don't know how, but they got like secret networks or something. Okay, there's like a chat room online somewhere where they all get together and talk about stuff. Okay, 19 out of 20 guys that come to us. How do you hear about us? Oh, my mom. Yep. Okay. The thing I will say is that the guys that come to us tend to already have a sense that something wasn't locking in for them. They're incredibly intelligent men, right? But very often it's the sort of thing where they say, like, listen, like, okay, like a lot of them are like classically educated even, right? Okay, and they're like, yeah, I love Homer and I spent a lot of Latin and I really like history, but if I have to sit in a room for 8 hours, I'm gonna stick this screwdriver through my eye, right? And they have this sense that they have this manual genius already, right? And sometimes we say they're on ADHD and we give them cocaine, right? Because that's a thing. Or what you could do is say, why don't we go outside and tear the engine apart? And you don't have to ask them twice. Oh, yeah, okay? Now, if you can marry that manual genius and energy to an integrated vision of the human person, right? Both spiritually and intellectually, like there's a whole momentum shift that you can take with them. And they show up and man, they do great. I'm going to tell you, I've taught in the humanities in one form for 25 years. The best students I've ever had are these gearheads. There's lots of reasons for that, but one of them is because if you live this way with reality, you have very, very little tolerance for BS. And there are entire courses you can skip, right? Oh, it's great, okay? Yeah, does that sort of answer the question? Very good. I love that question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned the idea of the wall versus the man. Oh, is it not on? Did I do it wrong? I can just talk loud enough.
Sure, and I'll repeat your question. How's that?
Sounds good. You talked about the idea of the wall versus the man building the wall.
Yeah.
And I hear and I see a lot of aimlessness amongst people my age and younger.
Yeah.
I don't know what I want to do, or I'm doing something and it just doesn't feel right
Yeah.
somehow. So I'm wondering, how do we convey this idea without, if you don't have a half hour to give a delightful talk like you gave tonight, if you just have a quick moment or a minute or with somebody, how do we convey this idea that the work is about building the man building the wall instead of just building the wall?
Yeah, so the question is like for someone who has an aimlessness about them, let me see if I got this right, okay? If you're dealing with someone who has an aimlessness about them or they don't really understand the adventure of work, how do you quickly convey to them that there is this adventure of becoming more themselves? Is that a good summary? I think it's great. You know what you do? Here's one thing you can do. You do what we do with our guys. You build go-karts that have paintball guns attached to them, and then you duct tape balloons to them, and you play Mario Kart for real. Community members are welcome to join us next May for the next race. Build a cart, talk to me, we'll get you hooked up, okay? Now, why do I say that's one thing that works? Here's what works. Here's what happens. You can try to tell them all sorts of things. Remember we talked about like the disincarnate word, blah, 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 right? Or you can give a man experience of his agency with something that's awesome, right? Or you can invite him to accompany you in that. And as he experiences new competence, he discovers new confidence. This is one of the most beautiful things I see with our guys. Some of them are scared to death of tearing apart an engine. We say, yeah, go for it. I don't know. Yeah, well, I might break it. Yeah, you're probably going to break it. It's okay to fail. But when they experience themselves, it's okay to fail, and they experience the competence that I can deal with failure, then they will experience in themselves the fact that they are becoming more. And this is, in a sense, the true version of, hey man, go to work. Okay? But if we just mean, tough it out, because that's what I had to do, that's not going to appeal to them. But if you just get to work, or you invite him to go to work, and you shoot him with paintballs, right? And he realizes how awesome it is to build and make things, then he will come to an understanding of how awesome it is to be a man who builds and makes things. Other questions over here?
Yes, here. My question is, how would you deal with the idea of being somebody that wants to raise a family and get a decent salary and feed their kids, but at the same time trying to pursue a professional career, agreeing with this work reality that you were explaining just right now?
So how am I going to balance the question? How am I going to balance this idea that I've got the practical needs of raising the family and providing for those I love, but then also have this sort of professional calling, correct? How do I balance those things? Well, listen, we can say all these sort of pretty things that we're saying tonight. Like, wasn't this fun? Yay, we said some things and we hope they're true, okay? But at the end of the day, I got to go home tonight, right? And I got kids, right? I got a lawn to mow. All this sort of, I think my wife may be watching. I mow the lawn, okay? And, right? And there's, even though, like, when we talk with our words, we can romanticize all of this, but the actual thing is difficult and ugly. And by the way, like, skilled trades work, a lot of our guys are like, oh, I want to be a skilled tradesman. And they're like, here, carry this heavy concrete for 8 hours. And they're like, this really stinks. And I'm like, yes, it does. We can overly romanticize this. And so the important thing is that we contextualize our work and who it is we become, right? In these larger callings that I was talking about before, right? We can't segment our work. This is what's important. Like, we can say all these things about our work, and we say all these things about how our work forms us, but that is always in the context of being a human person, and being a human person always means you are in relationship. That's what it means to be a human person. That's what it means to be a person. You are made for others. So one good litmus test of whether or not this is working is you're going to have all these wonderful ideas about your career and your work and how it's going to make me better and how I'm going to make more money and I'm going to be more competent or whatever it is. And if it turns you into an utter self-involved narcissistic creep, you're not doing it right. You're always a human person at work, and that means you're always called to love, and love is your primary vocation, and that needs to be the metric. Other than that, it's all going to be prudential in the concrete form. But so long as it's this message about work that we've had is always contextualized in the larger reality of who we are and who we're called to be in love, then you're probably not going to go too wrong. Because that one day, like, you're going to die. Sorry to break it to you if you didn't know, but one day you're going to die, right? And all the professional stuff isn't going to matter ultimately. It's going to be who you became, yes, through your work, but more importantly, like, through your love. So that sounds pretentious, but I think it's true. Yes, ma'am.
I know you're only in, you said 6th year?
Yeah, we're about to start our 6th year.
Okay. And I'm wondering if there has been any talk at all about, don't worry, not a co-ed program, but something for women who might have a sense of adventure and want competence and confidence.
All of the time. Yes, all the time. And from day one, right? Lots of talk like this. And one of the things, so at one point, it's died down in the last year, but at one point last year, it was the high water mark of phone calls. At one point, we were getting 5 phone calls a week. Hey, we'd like to start this new program. Hey, could you help us start this new program? Hey, have you thought of this sort of program? And I think it's great. The thing that I've had to learn how to say is, I think it's really, really great. Right now, I have to find enough couches for the guys in our new campus, right? So it's kind of like this, like there's some real practical things. And yeah, absolutely. And so what I tell people is like, yeah, if there's any way that we can be in support of that, let us know. But until I can find that couch, that's gonna, you know, the pragmatic needs of the day are really driving us. We're barely out of startup mode. But yeah, I think it's a great idea. Now, I haven't yet come across someone that's got the exact right model for it or what it would mean. But I should be as interested in it as you are. If you've got ideas, I'd like to know about it. Okay. Oh, right here, and then is this the last one? We got 3 minutes remaining. 5 minutes remaining. I don't have glasses on, so okay. 5 minutes remaining.
Hi, great talk. I find in a lot of Catholic circles, there's this almost cult around classical education. Like, you're a good Catholic parent if all of your kids have master's degrees in philosophy and know Aquinas by memory in the Latin. How do you find that your work either complicates or enriches or some way push against this sort of almost cult of liberal education that a lot of Catholics feel is a mark of their success as Christians?
Bringing the fire, bud. Bringing the fire. So are you trying to get me fired? Okay. Are you trying to make all these homeschool moms hate me? No. There's a couple ways you can view classical education. Well, maybe there's more than a couple, okay? One of them is, wow, it's a really great way to make sure my kid gets to college, which is a very not classical way of thinking of classical education, okay? I find that the best families that come out of education, or the best schools of classic education, are the ones that understand the real core of classical education, and that core is very much in harmony with what we're trying to do in the trades. And the way I would describe it, in fact, a brilliant fellow named Zach Good, I mentioned my bio, I'm still involved with Sacred Heart Academy here in town, right? And Zach Good is one of the geniuses behind that enterprise. And he explained it to me several years ago. Here's how we know what classical education is. Here it is, right? It is a formation of the student motivated by love. And that is a love of the teacher for the student, and of the student to the teacher. And because the student loves the teacher, the student will come to love what the teacher loves. And if the teacher loves good and beautiful and true things, then the student will come to love good and true and beautiful things. Okay. As long as we're viewing classical education in that way, and not simply like how much Latin you know, right? Then there's absolutely a profound comportment, because the reason we make the go-karts is because they're awesome. And if you don't get it, then like getting one. And then you're like, oh, I get it. These are awesome. Do you know what I mean? There's some subset of love for the world happening there. And the great thing about some of the trades is that sometimes you can feel that a little more readily, especially the guys with manual genius, they can feel it a lot more readily. So yeah, I think it's just it's a variant of classical education if you define it that way. Yeah, that's a great question. Did I manage not to upset any? Yeah. It occurred to me that the CLT, you need CL and T to spell cult. So that is pretty interesting. If you know, you know. Okay, so. Oh, we better not end on that one. Let's do one more. Could we do one more quick question so we don't end on that one? Yeah, okay. Yes, ma'am. Right here. That one's going to give me a lot of trouble. I love the CLT people, by the way. That was just totally a joke. Okay.
Yeah, thanks so much. So you mentioned this idea of attention to vulnerability in the trades and physical work. So I'm wondering, do you think there is anything similar in the work that doesn't have such a physical component, so like intellectual work?
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's an awesome question. So the question is whether or not there's like an analog to like an attention to vulnerability, like an intellectual work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there totally is. In fact, I was reading something just this morning about that. I thought it was really profound. And it said something like, you can only learn when you realize you're ignorant. Right? If you think if you know it all, you can't learn anything, right? So but what's interesting about that is I suspect, I'm not going to make this a proclamation, but I suspect it's harder to do with intellectual work. Because in fact, someone who's really good to read on this is the British neuroscientist Ian McGilchrist, right? Because intellectual work can have a draw towards what we'll just call like a God mentality. Because if I'm trying to look at something abstractly, in a sense, I'm kind of the master of that domain, right? And it can sometimes be a temptation to like think that because you have a degree in something that somehow that's transferable to other things, like because I know about physics that somehow now I know about politics or something like that. I would say it's harder to do with intellectual work because intellectual work is kind of abstractly self-contained, right? And it's easier to buy your own BS, so to speak. You don't have physical reality pushing back at you. But that being said, I think the truly great minds are the ones that cultivate in themselves a type of openness to reality that we call wonder. And that's why I think that certain types of intellectual enterprise like the arts or like music, for example, right, are super important of maintaining a type of vulnerability intellectually. Because, in fact, I would define the attention of vulnerability intellectually as like the capacity to wonder and to be open to the goodness of the world. So I suppose maybe that's an analog. Wow, what a good question. Yeah, good. Thank you. Good. Is that good? That was better than the joke. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, David, for that little gem of a talk. That was quite a treat and wonderful to have all the different educational institutions represented in this room. A few brief reminders as we close. Please turn in your name tags on the way out, and in your the bulletin around church, in your little handout here, there is a QR code that you can scan. Please fill that out, and you will use that survey to improve our events in the future. Also, please save your date for Acton's annual dinner on October 29th. That will feature Ross Douthat, so it'll be a wonderful night and a special year. We will also be honoring Nobel economist Vernon Smith at that dinner, so please join us for then. That is all from me. Have a wonderful night, and thank you for joining us.